library.
Yeah, the MasterMind Library.
Read the library, Daddy.
Mm-hmm.
Read the lion, Daddy.
Yes. Welcome to the MasterMind Library. I am. They call me Ferdinand, the bringer of balance, leader of many disciplines, and your host of the MasterMind Library, the home of the MasterMind Book Club on FHTII.com. And this is my co-host, Trigger. Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly what he said. And we have a live audience of Huey, Sincere, and Elijah. So we have made it to episode 92 of the MasterMind Library, and we have the NeverEnding Story. And today we are in chapter 19, I believe. Let's go take a look. That's chapter 21. Chapter 20. Let's see in hand. And today we are in, chapter 19, The Traveling Companions. And let's verify.
Library.
Yep, exactly what you said. We're going to verify that just for a second, Trey. We want to see, we want to make sure that's the last episode. Yep, all right, so it's chapter 19 today. All right, cool. So we are where we need to be. We got to make it a little bit bigger for everybody, Trey. Yep, uh-huh. Yep. All right, so we're good to go, Trey. Now let's go ahead and get started. Sunbeams were fighting their way through the cloud cover as the travelers started out that morning. At last, the rain and wind had let up. In the course of the morning, the travelers ran into 2 or 3 sudden showers. But then there was a marked improvement in the weather, and it seemed to grow warmer by the minute. The 3 knights were in a merry mood. They laughed and joked and played all sorts of tricks on one another. But Bastian seemed quiet and out of sorts as he rode ahead on his mule, and the knights had far too much respect for him to break in on his thoughts. The rocky high plateau over which they were riding seemed endless, but little by little the trees became larger and more frequent. Atreyu had noticed Bastian's bad humor. When he and Falcor started on their usual reconnaissance flight, he asked the luck dragon what he could do to cheer his friend up. Falcor rolled his ruby-red eyeballs and answered, "That's easy. Didn't he want to ride on me?" When some time later, the little band rounded a jutting cliff, they found Atreyu and the luck dragon lying comfortably in the sun. Bastian looked at them in amazement. "Are you tired?" he asked. "Not at all," said Atreyu. "I just wanted to ask if you'd let me ride Yika for a while. I've never ridden a mule. It must be wonderful, because you never seem to get sick of it. I'll lend you my old Falcor in return." Bastian flushed with pleasure. "Is that true, Falcor?" he asked. "You wouldn't mind carrying me?" "Of course not, all-powerful Sultan," said the dragon with a wink. "Hop on and hold tight." Without touching the ground, Bastian vaulted directly from the mule to the dragon back and clutched the silvery white mane as Falcor took off. Bastian hadn't forgotten how Grogramon had carried him through the desert of colors. But riding a white lug dragon was something else again. If sweeping over the ground on the back of the fiery lion had been like a cry of ecstasy, this gentle rising and falling as the dragon adjusted his movements to the air currents was like a song, now soft and sweet, now triumphant with power, especially when Falcor was looping the loop, when his mane, his fangs, and the long fringes on his limbs flashed through the air like white flames. It seemed to Bastion that the winds were singing in chorus. Toward noon, they sighted the others and landed. The ground party had pitched camp beside a brook in a sunlit meadow. There was a flatbread to eat, and a kettle of soup was cooking over a wood fire. The horses and the mule were grazing nearby. When the meal was over, the three knights decided to go hunting, for supplies, especially of meat, were running low. They had heard the cry of pheasants in the thicket, and there seemed to be hares as well. Knowing the greenskins to be great hunters, they asked Atreyu to join them, but he declined. Thereupon the knights took their long bows, buckled on their quivers full of arrows, and went off to the woods. Atreyu, Falcor, and Bastion stayed behind. After a short silence, Atreyu suggested, "How about telling us a little more about your world, Bastion?" "What would interest you?" Bastion asked. Atreyu turned to the luck dragon. "What do you say, Falcor? I'd like to hear something about the children in your school," said the dragon. Bastion seemed bewildered. "What children?" he asked. "The ones who made fun of you," said Falcor. "Children who made fun of me," Bastion repeated. "I don't know of any children, and I'm sure no child would have dared to make fun of me." Atreyu broke in. "But you must remember that you went to school." "Yes," said Bastion thoughtfully. "I remember school. Yes, that's right." Atreyu and Falcor exchanged glances. "I was afraid of that," Atreyu muttered. "Afraid of what?" "You've lost some more of your memory," said Atreyu gravely. "This time it came of changing the Acaris into Schlamoofs. You shouldn't have done that." "Bastion Balthasar Bucks," said the dragon, and his tone seemed almost stern. "If my advice means anything to you, stop using the power that Orin gives you. If you don't, you're likely to lose your last memories. And without memory, how will you ever find your way back to where you came from?" "To tell the truth," said Bastion, "I don't want to go back anymore." Atreyu was horrified. "But you have to go back. You have to go back and straighten out your world so humans will start coming to Fantasia again. Otherwise, Fantasia will disappear sooner or later, and all our trouble will have been wasted." At that point, Bastion felt rather offended. "But I'm still here," he protested. "It's been only a little while since I gave Moonchild her new name." Atreyu could think of nothing to say, but then Falcor spoke up. "Now," he said, "I see why we haven't made the slightest progress in finding Bastion's way back. If he himself doesn't want to—" "Bastion," said Atreyu, almost pleadingly, "isn't there anything that draws you? Something you love? Don't you ever think of your father, who must be waiting for you and worrying about you?" Bastion shook his head. "I don't think so. Maybe he's even glad to be rid of me." Atreyu looked at his friend in horror. "The way you two carry on," said Bastion bitterly. "You almost sound as if you wanted to get rid of me, too." "What do you mean by that?" said Atreyu with a catch in his voice. "Well," said Bastion, "you seem to have only one thing on your minds. Getting me out of Fantasia as quickly as possible." Atreyu looked at Bastion and slowly shook his head. For a long while, none of them said a word. Already, Bastion was beginning to regret his angry words. He himself knew they were unjust. Then Atreyu said softly, "I thought we were friends." You were right, Bastian cried. We are and always will be. Forgive me. I've been talking nonsense. Atreyu smiled. You'll have to forgive us too for hurting your feelings. We didn't mean it. Anyway, said Bastian, I'm going to take your advice. After a while, the three knights returned with several partridges, a pheasant, and a hare. When the party started out again, Bastian was riding Yika. In the afternoon, they came to a forest consisting entirely of tall, straight evergreens, which formed high overhead a green roof so dense that a ray of sunlight seldom reached the ground. That may have been why there was no underbrush. The soft, smooth forest floor was pleasant to ride on. Falcor had resigned himself to trotting along with the company, because if he had flown above the treetops with Atreyu, he would undoubtedly have lost sight of the others. All afternoon they rode through the dark green twilight. Toward nightfall, they spied a ruined castle on a hilltop. They climbed up to it, and in the midst of all the crumbling walls and turrets, halls and passageways, they found a vaulted chamber that was in fairly good condition. There they settled down for the night. It was red-headed Heisbald's turn to cook, and he proved to be much better at it than his predecessor. The pheasant he roasted over the fire was as tasty as you please. The next morning, they resumed their journey. All day they rode through the forest, which looked like the same on all sides. It was late in the day when they noticed that they must have been riding in a great circle, for ahead of them they saw the ruins of the castle they had left in the morning. But this time they were approaching it from a different direction. This has never happened to me before, said Hycrion, twirling his black mustache. I can't believe my eyes, grumbled Heisbald, stalking through the ruins on his long, thin legs. But so it was. The remains of yesterday's dinner left no room for doubt. Atreyu and Falcor said nothing, but their thoughts were hard at work. How could they have made such a mistake? At the evening meal, this time it was roast hare, prepared more or less competently by Hycrion. The three knights asked Bastian if he would care to impart some of his memories of the world he came from. Bastian excused himself by saying he had a sore throat, and since he had been very quiet all that day, the knights believed him. After suggesting a few effective remedies, they lay down to sleep. Only Atreyu and Falcor suspected what Bastian was thinking. Early in the morning, they started off again. All day they rode through the forest, trying their best to keep going in a straight line. But at nightfall, they were back at the same ruined castle. Well, I'll be, Hycrion blustered. I'm going mad, groaned Heisbald. Friends, said Hydorn disgustedly, we might as well throw our licenses in the trash bin. Some knights errant we turned out to be. On their first night at the castle, Bastian, knowing that Gika liked to be alone with her thoughts now and then, had found her a special little niche. The company of the horses, who could think of nothing to talk about but their distinguished ancestry, upset her. That night, after Bastian had taken her back to her place, she said to him, Master, I know why we're not getting ahead. How can you know that, Yika? Because I carry you, Master. And because I'm only half an ass, I feel certain things. So according to you, why is it? You don't want to get ahead, Master. You stop wishing for anything. Bastian looked at her in amazement. You are really a wise animal, Yika. The mule flapped her long ears in embarrassment. Do you know which way we've been going? No, said Bastion. Do you? Yika nodded. We've been heading for the center of Fantasia, for the ivory tower. Yes, master. And we made good headway as long as we kept going in that direction. That's not possible, said Bastion. Atreyu would have noticed it, and certainly Falcor would have, but they didn't. We mules, said Yika, are simple creatures, not in a class with luck dragons, but we do have certain gifts, and one of them is a sense of direction. We never go wrong. That's how I knew for sure that you wanted to visit the childlike empress. Moonchild, Bastion murmured. Yes, I would like to see her again. She'll tell me what to do. Then he stroked the mule's white nose and whispered, Thanks, Yika, thanks. Next morning, Atreyu took Bastion aside. Listen, Bastion, Falcor and I want to apologize. The advice we gave you was meant well, but it was stupid. We just haven't been getting ahead. Falcor and I talked it over last night. You'll be stuck here, and so will we, until you wish for something. It's bound to make you lose more of your memory, but that can't be helped. There's nothing else you can do. We can only hope that you find the way back before it's too late. It won't do you any good to stay here. You'll just have to think of your next wish and use Orin's power. Right, said Bastion. Yika said the same thing. And I already know what my next wish will be. Let's go. I want you all to hear it. They rejoined the others. Friends, said Bastion in a loud voice. So far, we've been looking in vain for the way back to my world. Now I've decided to go and see the one person who can help me find it. That one person is the childlike empress. Our destination is now the ivory tower. Hurrah! Cried the three knights in unison. But then Falcor's bronze voice rang out. Don't do it, Bastion Balthasar Bucks. What you wish is impossible. Don't you know that no one can meet the golden-eyed commander of wishes more than once? You will never see her again. Bastion clenched his fists. Moonchild owes me a lot, he said angrily. I'm sure she won't keep me away. You'll see, Falcor replied, that her decisions are sometimes hard to understand. Bastion felt the color rising to his cheeks. You and Atreyu, he said, are always giving me advice. You can see where your advice has got us. From now on, I'll do the deciding. I've made up my mind, and that's it, and that's that. He took a deep breath and went on a little more calmly. Besides, you always speak from your point of view. You two are Fantasians, and I'm a human. How can you be sure that the same rules apply to me as to you? It was different when Atreyu had Orin. And who else but me is going to give the gem back to Moonchild? No one can meet her twice, you say. But I've already met her twice. The first time we saw each other only for a moment, when Atreyu went into her chamber, and the second time when the big egg exploded. With me, everything is different. I will see her a third time. Let me lay him down right here. Elijah. All right. Elijah, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. What do you think you should do? You move to the edge. There you go. All were silent. The knights, because they didn't know what it was all about. Atreyu and Falcor, because they were beginning to have doubts. Well, said Atreyu finally, maybe you're right. We have no way of knowing how the childlike empress will deal with you. After that, they started out. And before noon, they reached the edge of the forest. Before them lay sloping meadows as far as the eye could see. Soon they came to a winding river and followed its course. Again, Atreyu and Falcor explored the country, describing wide circles around their slow-moving companions. But both were troubled, and their flight was not as light and carefree as usual. Looking ahead, they saw that the country changed abruptly at a certain point in the distance. A steep slope led from the plateau to a low-lying, densely wooded plain, and the river descended the slope in a mighty waterfall. Knowing that the riders couldn't hope to get that far before the next day, the two scouts turned back. Falcor, Atreyu asked, do you suppose the childlike empress cares what becomes of Bastion? Maybe not, said Falcor. She draws no distinctions. Then, said Atreyu, she is really a... Don't say it, Falcor broke in. I know what you mean, but don't say it. For a while, Atreyu was silent. Then he said, but he's my friend, Falcor. We've got to help him, even against the childlike empress's will, if we have to. But how? With luck, the dragon replied, and for the first time the bronze bell of his voice seemed to have sprung a crack. That evening, the company chose a deserted log cabin on the riverbank as their night lodging. For Falcor, of course, it was too small, and he preferred to sleep on the air. The horses and Yika also had to stay outside. During the evening meal, Atreyu told the others about the waterfall and the abrupt change in the country. Then he added casually, by the way, we're being followed. The three knights exchanged glances. Oh-ho! Cried Hycrion, giving his black mustache a martial twirl. How many are they? I counted 7 behind us, said Atreyu. But even if they ride all night, they can't be here before morning. Are they armed? Asked Heisbald. I couldn't tell, said Atreyu, but there are more coming from other directions. I saw 6 in the west, 9 in the east, and 12 or 13 are coming up from ahead. We'll wait and see what they want, said Hydorn. 35 or 36 men would hardly frighten the 3 of us, much less Sir Bastion and Atreyu. Ordinarily, Bastion ungirt the sword Sakanda before lying down to sleep. But that night, he kept it on and slept with his hand on the hilt. In his dreams, he saw Moonchild smiling at him, and her smile seemed full of promise. If there was any more to the dream, he forgot it by the time he woke up, but his vision encouraged him in his hope of seeing her again. Glancing out of the door of the cabin, he saw 7 blurred shapes through the mist that had risen from the river. 2 were on foot, the others mounted on different sorts of steeds. Bastion quietly awakened his companions. The knights unsheathed their swords, and together they stepped out of the cabin. When the figures waiting outside caught sight of Bastion, the riders dismounted, and all 7 went down on their left knees, bowed their heads, and cried out, "Hail and welcome to Bastion Balthasar Bucks, the savior of Fantasia." The newcomers were a weird-looking lot. One of the 2 who had come on foot had an uncommonly long neck and a head with 4 faces. One pointed in each of the four directions. The first was merry, the second angry, the third sad, and the fourth sleepy. All were rigid and unchanging, but he was able at any time to face forward with the one expressing his momentary mood. This individual was a four-quarter troll, sometimes known as a moody woody. The second pedestrian was what is known in Fantasia as a head footer. His head was connected directly with his long, thin legs, there being neither neck nor trunk. Head footers are always on the go and have no fixed residence. As a rule, they roam about in swarms of many hundreds, but from time to time, one runs across a loner. They feed on herbs and grasses. The one that was kneeling to Bastion looked young and red cheeked. The three creatures riding on horses no longer than goats were a gnome, a shadow camp, and a blondie cat. The gnome had a golden circlet around his head and was obviously a prince. The shadow scamp was hard to recognize because, to all intents and purposes, he consisted only of a shadow cast by no one. The blondie cat had a cat like face and long golden blonde curls that clothed her like a coat. Her whole body was covered with equally blonde, shaggy fur. She was no bigger than a 5-year-old child. Another, who was riding on an ox, came from the land of the Sassafranians, who are born old and die when they have grown to infancy. This one had a long white beard, a bald head, and a heavily wrinkled face. By Sassafranian standards, he was a youngster, about Bastion's age. A blue djinn had come on a camel. He was tall and thin and was wearing an enormous turban. His shape was human, but his bare torso, with its bulging muscles, seemed to be made of some glossy blue metal. Instead of a nose and mouth, he had a huge, hooked eagle's beak. "Who are you and what do you want?" Hycrion asked rather brusquely. Despite the ceremony's greeting, he wasn't quite convinced of the visitor's friendly intentions. He still had his hand on his sword hilt. The four-quarter troll, who was up until then had been keeping his sleepy face foremost, now switched to the merry one. Ignoring Hycrion, he addressed himself to Bastion. "Your lordship," he declared, "we are princes from many different parts of Fantasia, and we have all come to welcome you and ask for your help. The news of your presence has flown from country to country. The wind and the clouds speak your name. The waves of the sea proclaim your glory, and every last brooklet is celebrating your power." Bastion cast a glance at Atreyu, but Atreyu looked at the troll unsmilingly and almost severely. "We know," the blue djinn broke in, and his voice sounded like the rasping cry of an eagle. "We know that you created Perilyn, the night forest, and Goab, the desert of colors. We know you have eaten and drunk the fire of the many-colored death and bathed in it, something that no one else in Fantasia could have done and still lived. We know that you passed through the Temple of 1,000 Doors, and we know what happened in the Silver City of Amargoth. We know, my lord, that there is nothing you cannot do. When you make a wish, your wishes come to pass. And so we invite you to come and stay with us and favor us with a story of your own. For none of our nations has a story." Bastion thought it over, then shook his head. "I can't do what you ask of me just yet. I'll help you later on. But first I must go to the childlike empress. I hope you will join us and help me to find the ivory tower." The creatures didn't seem at all disappointed. After brief deliberation, they agreed to accompany Bastion on his journey. whereupon the procession, which by now had the look of a small caravan, started out again. Throughout the day, they were joined by new adherents, not only those Atreyu had sighted the day before, but many more. There were goat-legged fawns and gigantic night hobs. There were elves and kobolds, beetle riders, and three legsies, a man-sized rooster and jackboots, a stag with golden antlers who walked erect and wore a Prince Albert. Many of the new arrivals bore no resemblance whatsoever to human beings. There were helmeted copper ants, strangely shaped wandering rocks, flute birds who made music with their long beaks, and there were three so-called puddlers who moved by dissolving into a puddle at every step and resuming their usual form a little further on. But perhaps the most startling of all was a twee, whose fore and hindquarters had a way of running about independently of one another. Except for its red and white stripes, it looked rather like a hippopotamus. Soon the procession numbered at least 100, and all had come to welcome Bastian, the savior of Fantasia, and beg him for a story of their own. But the original 7 told the others that they would first have to go to the ivory tower, and all were agreed. Hycreon, Heisbald, and Hydorn rode with Bastian in the lead of the now rather impressive procession. Toward evening, they came to a waterfall. Leaving the plateau, they made their way down a winding mountain trail, at the end of which they found themselves in a forest of tree-sized orchids with enormous spotted blossoms. These blossoms looked so frightening that when the travelers stopped for the night, they decided to post sentries. Bastian and Atreyu gathered some of the deep, soft moss that lay all about and made themselves a comfortable bed. Falcor protected the two friends by lying down in a circle around them. The air was warm and heavy with the strange and none too pleasant scent of the orchids. The scent seemed fraught with evil. And that concludes chapter 19. On our next episode, we'll be diving into chapter 20, The Seeing Hand. All right. Y'all be blessed. Expose your gift. Oh, looks like we got us a comment. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and I'll get with you, Indigenous Realist. Thank you for hitting us up on the MasterMind Library. All right. So y'all be blessed and expose your gift.